the really fundamental issue here is, what is life? How does a living organism differ from a non-living object like a stone or a piece of metal or whatever that is non-living? That issue had been puzzling philosophers and scientists for hundreds of years, but it became clear in the early 20th century that at least the chief difference between an organism and a non-living object was its heredity, was the ability to reproduce new individuals of the same sort from which like the parents. And so the fundamental question of life is, how do you transmit this information from one generation to the next? How do you make offspring like their parents? Extraordinarily exciting period to live through, to see it all unfold. I think that no one could have guessed ahead of time really how it worked. The most exciting thing, or most interesting thing in a way, is how simple it all is. I mean, I think people, non-scientists, tend to think science is, they always say, it's so complicated I can never understand it. But in fact, the great thing about science is that it simplifies things. And so, given this real conundrum which has existed from the time of Aristotle, of what distinguishes a living organism from a rock, we now know. And we know not only in general, but we know in particular how it's done. And it's simple. It's a set of instructions that is carried in the DNA, and these instructions are read out during the development of each individual, during its embryonic development, during its later development up until the adult. And it's transmitted from generation to generation in the sperm and the egg. Well, in the 50s, when I was just beginning my PhD work, we knew that the chromosomes were the carriers of heredity. That had been deduced in the 19th century by some really brilliant people. But the chemical nature of the chromosome, the chemical nature of the gene, was totally a mystery at that time. Since proteins had been studied extensively, and much more so than nucleic acids, people thought that the hereditary material probably was protein. Although we did know that there were these nucleic acids, particularly DNA, desoxyribose nucleic acid, in the chromosomes, but it wasn't at all clear that this was the hereditary material in the 1950s. And so part of the problem that anyone investigating chromosomes at that time had to deal with is, what is the fundamental nature of the chromosome? How is the proteins organized? How are the nucleic acids organized in the chromosomes? Which part is the hereditary material? Which part is the genes? Those were questions which really weren't answered. Actually, they really weren't answered so much by people like myself looking at chromosomes. They were answered by people studying DNA, and eventually, of course, in the early 1960s with the Watson and Crick model, and with the experiments of well, Avery, McLeod, and McCarty, and experiments of, on phage by Hershey and Chase. It became clear that the real hereditary material was the DNA. So then the question became, how is the DNA organized in the chromosome?